Thanks a lot. So we talked a lot about R&D in the first panel. Now we're going to talk about, well, if you got an idea, and how can you actually find your way to some money or support to create a company around your idea. So Garrett Nilsen is technical advisor at the Department of Energy's SunShot initiative, which we will talk about some, but the thing for you to remember as we start the conversation is he's part of a program that actually wants to help innovators start and create great new energy conservation technologies. Hooray, the government's here to help. And David McCarthy is also here to help. He is founder of Potential Energy DC, which is an incubator that is fighting a good fight on getting companies started. And John Britton is the general counsel for Consortium of Energy, Environment, and Demilitarization. Man, that's a long one today. John wears a number of hats. He's part of a group that manages a number of consortia that help entrepreneurs, what the Pentagon calls non-traditional innovators, find their ways into R&D and then programs of record. So he'll have a good bit of things to say about how, if you have an interesting technology, you can play with his group and this consortium and find your way to resources. So I'll start with you, Garrett. You know, since I gave the highlight, the SunShot initiative, $30 million to spend to help reduce the cost of solar energy and solar equipment. Tell me more.
All right, thank you, and thanks for having me. So I work inside of one group in the SunShot initiative. So we actually, our yearly budget is on the order of about $240 to $250 million a year. So that covers everything from kind of more basic cell level R&D at the national labs. We look at systems integration. How do we get all this to play nice on the grid? How do we work with local municipalities and governments to ease the access to solar energy to the grid? So I work specifically on our technology to market team, and we run essentially a yearly funding opportunity for, over the last few years, it's been anywhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $45 million. And we focus primarily on small businesses. So how do we get you from your first initial, let's say, pixel cell prototype out actually into the lab, or not into the lab, into the market? Yeah. And so we look across the entire, pardon the pun, solar spectrum, where we look at cell technologies, module technologies, and form factors, anything that relates to integrating solar energy on the grid, whether it be grid controls, grid modeling, etc. Concentrating solar power is still an area that we look at. And of course, soft costs, how we drive down the cost of financing, the cost of interconnection, the time it takes to permit a project, etc. And so our group specifically works, or I run a group that works specifically with small businesses. We run kind of a tiered, stage-gated funding opportunity where you can get anywhere from 1 to a couple of years of funding, anywhere from a few $100,000 up to $4 or $5 million to take your technology from the lab, get it vetted by customers. We help hook you up with national labs, help get it further vetted by them, and then eventually, let you into the marketplace to make an impact.
Sounds great. You sound like my drunk uncle giving away money. How do I find my way into this program?
I hope we're less liberal with giving out money than your drunk uncle.
Okay.
So all of the renewable energies at the Department of Energy post all their funding on what's it called, EERE Exchange, where you can actually read the funding announcements that we put out. So everything from our office goes through there, wind energy, etc. And in terms of the ease of getting money, let me just address that really quick, is our group specifically, we don't, and this is just our segment inside of our office, we don't actually work with grants. We work with something called a cooperative agreement.
Great.
So yeah, a little bit different. So here's the way it will work, right? So you apply to me to get a project, you make it through the selection project.
Which you'll give to me immediately because you remind me of my uncle.
Right.
But anyways, more realistically,
so the whole point is that you apply, and then we will spend essentially on the order of a few weeks to a month with you, defining what you will deliver to me every quarter. So you will make X number of efficiency improvement, let's say on a solar cell. You'll make it this much larger in area. And then we also include business metrics as well to be sure that you're actually engaging with the customer. So, you should be showing us that you're getting letters of support, letters of interest, potentially orders and things on that nature. And your ability to get funds from us is tied to your passing those milestones. So you are actually working kind of at your own risk to a degree. You turn in everything to me saying, I've accomplished all of these goals, and then we will reimburse you for a segment of that. And so it's a different method, allows us to take a bit more risk in terms of the companies that we select, and it allows us to actually help guide these projects a bit more rigorously, I think, because obviously the government has a slightly different view of the marketplace than, say, an individual company has an idea. So hopefully not quite drunk uncle-esque, but we're here to help.
Sound
We're here to
like
help. So here to help.
Yeah, you sound more like my mom than my drunk uncle. Anyway.
Thanks, I guess.
No, I know. It's, he and I are going to have a quiet sidebar conversation now about, anyway.
Dave, you're running Potential Energy. It's an incubator for energy sustainability companies. What kind of funding are you seeing more broadly out there for companies that want to start in this space, and what other resources is an accelerator incubator like Potential Energy able to provide to help people get these companies off the ground?
I'll give you a good example, and I'll do it by way of making a recommendation to Garrett's program. The FOAs come out on a regular cycle on the federal government budgeting cycle. So calendar year ends in September, October 1, all the new money is going to get released. So if you're taking a vacation this summer and you have like a week to burn, bring a printout or a listing of everything that's on the EERE FOA website and find the thing you want to go after. That will be time well spent. It will drive you faster to get the funding you need, to get your product built, and to get your first sale in the marketplace, which will then get you much more opportunity for fundraising for seed rounds or private money. So that's an example of what we do at Potential Energy DC. We're familiar with the market. We're familiar with how these companies get funded from startup, ongoing. We have a good relationship with the SunShot program. We have a number of companies that have gotten SunShot awards through the past year or so. So we bring companies in. We say no company is too early, no idea is too crazy. Come on in, let's kind of evaluate it together and see if there's an there. Over the past year, we've done a broader is there in terms of startups in the DC region trying to solve energy problems. And we found that there is most definitely a there here. We've had a number of companies go from pre-product, concept only, build a product, get the first paying client, complete a seed round, and now into their early growth stages. And that's really the process that we try to hit, is those very early stage companies that kind of find no love in the DC market at this point.
Right.
Because the companies have a little bit longer runway require a little bit more funding, especially if you're working on something hardware related. And that's the niche that we're trying to fill, is that very early stage energy startup. Find them the resources, give them the advice they need to get up off the ground.
Well, so speaking as a refugee from the venture industry, I know exactly what you're talking about, and you know, the reality is that just about everywhere in the country this is true, but certainly true here. The venture capitalists don't take technology risk. You know, I don't know who they expect to fund the technology risk, but venture capitalists they might have to take business model risk these days, meaning they almost expect you to figure out how to sell to your first $1 million of customers they can scale. So having said that, this is a big national problem. We just had a panel where we talked about batteries and energy capture. It sounded pretty clear from the conversation at the last panel that our national security establishment is going to hit a wall pretty soon unless there's some changes in energy. I'll come back to you, Dave. I want to bring John into the conversation. John, you've got this consortium. How are you guys reaching out and finding your innovators? What kind of resources can you help them find? And then let's start to think about what we have here in the way of an ecosystem to really drive this conversation forward.
Sure. Again, I'm with one of the consortia is the Consortium for Energy, Environment, and Demilitarization. We are a consortium that operates under the regime called the Other Transaction Authority. We have an OTA with the Department of Army. We work out of Piccadilly, New Jersey. That's our contracting office. But it's not restricted to Army or even Department of Defense. In fact, DOE has OTA authority, and so projects could filter through here. It's very interesting listening to the first panel because a lot of technologies were expressed, and of course the problems that you alluded to. All of that plays into the Pentagon's focus on its third offset strategy, which you mentioned. concept that's been around for a couple of years, but now it's making a big play. Just a story in the Post this past weekend about third offset strategy and the inability of the government to reach the small entrepreneurial shops. Ashton Carter has been out in Silicon Valley 3 times, I think, in the past year, at least twice.
And he's come out to Tyson's, we're right there, doesn't he fly all the way?
Tell me about it. You read my op-ed pieces in the Post every week.
And I'll use Silicon Valley generically, but he has gone out to California a couple of times. And they're struggling with how do we get in touch with this entrepreneurial world that doesn't do business with the government. And the earlier panel was interesting because it talked about the outreach, which is all very good and it works, and it's very vibrant. But the step that's missing in that conversation is, okay, you get the outreach or identify a project, now you move it into the contract, the acquisition world. Boom, that's where the blockage is. I'm a lawyer, and my people have for years worked hard to develop hindrances called the FAR, so to prevent you all from having efficient contracts.
Revenge of the nerds.
Exactly. I'm now the general counsel for the OTA,
Yeah,
the OTA world, which is a very unique non-FAR acquisition process. So we are a facilitator of contracts and acquisition. So I don't hand out any money, but we make that connection between the government and small businesses through OTA, which it just prohibits use of the FAR. We have a very, very small guidebook that we use with Department of Defense from the time of the development of the technical requirements to operating in your project, your proposal, 60 to 90 days to get the project out the door. So it's an expedited acquisition tool that this year, this fiscal year, so we're talking about ending in a couple months, we will be processing about $400 million, primarily involving small businesses throughout the country in both high-tech and energy works.
And I also want to make sure that we point out that this contract vehicle is really important, and it's something that we will work on here at Tandem as well. The key, and what you want to know John for, is that the consortium, if you have a technology or a small business that is of interest, and John is a consequent to the number of different vertical areas that where these consortiums have been formed. If you have a business is interesting, you can join the consortium, and then you can work with larger companies to actually build things. It's
Actually,
very collaborative.
if I may interrupt for 1 second, you are key in this process because, excuse me, one of the statutory requirements is that if you're a Lockheed Martin or something, you have to pay 1/3 cost share of a project. However, if you have a small business or a non-traditional working with you, that cost share is eliminated. But the non-business has to be the key player.
Right.
The non-traditional, the small business has to be the key player.
And the other thing is that issues like intellectual property ownership and who owns what is also managed by the consortium. So it really is designed to create it's a very nice petri dish. So if you have something that's of particular interest, definitely a model you want to make sure you get his business card. So David, I'll turn back to you and Garrett. What does it take to build a really vibrant ecosystem around energy innovation? And do we have the makings of it here in DC? Is it, and if we don't have it yet, what's missing? What do we need to find?
I'm going to pull out a business card.
Mine?
Mine.
Oh, yours, okay.
But our logo basically embodies the environment that we think needs to be present to have this self-sustaining ecosystem of innovation and funding. So the blue is the blue sky thinking of the entrepreneur. So there's got to be a base of innovation to start with. Rich in Silicon Valley, rich in Boston, becoming even richer in New York. And DC needs to be recognized as a keeper of that innovation. And one of the things that's different about DC that I think we get kind of short-shrifted on is that we don't typically have and when we started PDC, we thought this was going to be the model. The 22 to 25-year-old male coder, pizza, Red Bull, foosball. We don't have a lot of that in DC. We have attorneys, we have policy wonks, we have kind of like the antithesis of that.
I see a lot more of that, for what it's worth. I see a lot more of that today than I did 5 years ago.
Agreed.
A lot less football, a lot of Red Bull.
But I think there's a large base of seasoned engineers coming out of the defense contractors, coming out of the government itself. And our current membership at PEDC, we just signed member number 21, and the average age is over 40, and fully 1/3 of that membership is female. So very different than what we had initially expected. So the blue sky thinking of the entrepreneurs is number one. Then the second ball on there is a green ball, and that's the money. And now there's a lot of money in DC. It's easy to find, but it's impossible to wring out of your drunk uncle's fist sometimes. It's looking for very low risk. There's a lot of commercial real estate money here. There's a lot of simple tech money here. And when you talk about clamping a sensor underground on a grid trunk and putting 100 of them underground that you're never going to see again, that's a lot of risk for these type of investors to take on. So that's more of an evolutionary process to start chipping away at that, what risks people are willing to take on in the green ball. And then from an energy point of view, the red ball is indispensable. That's the policymakers. Sometimes we call it the red tape. But it's the policymakers getting involved in understanding the policy landscape of what goes on. You don't want to just wholesale start throwing new stuff on the grid. It's going to break. People will be pissed. So the policymakers are very important. And then the yellow glow behind all of those is PDC bringing all of those together in one place at one time to get this virtual cycle started.
So how good an ecosystem is this? If I wanted to start an energy company, would I start here, or would I start in Silicon Valley, or start in Boston? What would be the advantage of starting here?
It's getting better. Even in the past year, it's getting better. I have the kind of job where at the end of the day, I'm tired. I don't feel like I've gotten anything done. But if you look back over a year, we've gone from 0 to 21 members. We have at least a half dozen companies that have gone through the virtuous cycle, starting the virtuous cycle of pre-product, product, first sale, seed stage, hiring, and now into early growth.
Okay.
So it's getting there. It's not great. I mean, if you expect to go out concept only and raise $1 million on a $5 million valuation, buy your airline ticket to SFO right now. But if you have a concept that you've been able to sell at least once, you've got some traction, you will get some interest from angels and seed stage investors. You'll at least get the audience here now.
So, Garrett, what's been the influence of oil prices falling the way they have? Has that affected in a way people's interest in innovating in solar and energy consumption? Do you see any change in behavior?
I think you see a change in investor behavior, short-term investor behavior, but in the long term, it's still kind of a fundamental need of what's going forward, right? So it's a misconception, right? I mean, how many of the electrons going into the lights in this room are come from oil? Like 0. So it's pretty much a misconception. Natural gas is a different issue, but I mean, natural gas is essentially bottomed out. That's probably going to go up a little bit higher in the short run and higher in the long run. So I think, you kind of have to look at it separately. I mean, when you think about solar energy, at least, like it's competitive without subsidy in about 18 and 50 states right now.
Yeah.
And that's going even faster down that slope. So I think I have a very biased opinion when I call it like an inevitability, but it's something that is really coming fast. In terms of, I want to touch on really quick when you're talking about like this area and what's kind of interesting about it in terms of developing an ecosystem. And there's two parts of it. The one thing when you think about energy innovation, and I'm not saying they have it here, I don't think they have it necessarily in Silicon Valley, it's hard to find it anywhere in the world, is patient capital.
Yeah.
And so when you think about like why has China been able to take the lead on some green technologies, because they have extremely patient capital. And in the private sector, you don't see a lot of that patient capital. During the downturn in the market, it fled a lot of the renewable energy space, which the industry is still recovering from. One thing I think is really interesting about this particular area, and there's a company that my office funded recently that kind of exemplifies this, is you're right, we have a lot of people who are very interesting engineering backgrounds here, and people looking to apply their solutions across technology spaces. So, there's a gentleman up here earlier who had mentioned kind of remote sensors and very low cost remote sensors. that is something of extreme need on today's distribution grid. I mean, you think that the electricity coming into your house is monitored down to the volt. It's not really at that exact location, right? So there is a lot of just encouraging people to take their background and apply it somewhere else. And so we've recently funded a company who developed extremely low-cost temperature sensors for basically extraterrestrial habitats for NASA. And now they are adapting that technology to work in monitoring the distribution grid. And so it's about taking what your engineering background is and really thinking outside that box. And I just want to think there was a gentleman sitting up here earlier who was saying that it feels like sometimes you get stuck in kind of the same applicant pools. And that's one of the things that I think this area is very unique in that you have a lot of diverse backgrounds, very technically strong backgrounds, and there's plenty of funding around here. But it's just a matter of at least taking a look outside what's your comfort zone. And that's where I think DC has a tremendous advantage over anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, I think that that's really true. So a good friend of mine, some of you knows Mike Daniels, who was one of the founders of SAIC, and Mike and I are involved. He's one of the advisors of Tandem, and we do a lot of things together. And he's, as is I, done business in Silicon Valley, done business here. He said to me last year, Jonathan, the biggest difference between entrepreneurs in Washington, D.C. and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley is everybody wants to make money, but entrepreneurs in D.C. actually want to serve the public interest. If you think about why you're here, most of us come here because we want to actually serve in some way, or be involved in serving in some way. And it does make us very adaptable. I do think that it's one of the reasons why we're all here tonight, is we need to do a better job of letting the entrepreneurs know about these opportunities, and making them as acculturated to look for them as they are for venture capital. I mean, everybody knows every VC does hand out money or not, but I wonder how many people know about you, about the consortium. That's our biggest challenge.
And I'd say that is one challenge. But then there is, and again, it was mentioned earlier, and it's exactly right, there is a litany of misconceptions over what happens when someone's idea gets put on paper and handed to the government. Mm-hmm. Like, my IP is gone, if this is a Freedom of Information Act, there's no chance for me to even respond to that, anything like that. And all of that's just false. Right. And that's something that we run into a lot. There's always hey, that's something that non-dilutive capital gets people's ears up. Right. But when it comes to there's too many rules and stuff like that. And so I think that's one issue.
You guys have some questions? Yes, sir.
I have a comment referencing research. Right now you're talking about people who actually are entrepreneurs or basically engineers. But there's everything from college students to high school kids who basically are bored to death. They're basically spend millions and millions of hours on Minecraft. You're missing an opportunity. You're missing a huge opportunity by not basically submitting basically problems that your science teachers from high school, even middle school, can try to solve with the kids who have tons of time, tons of information on the internet. They can search the globe and find information. You're missing the boat. You aren't searching low enough on the low-hanging fruit. Because the kids got great ideas. They just bounce it off their teachers. Teachers are working to death in school, but they're teaching the same stuff. The research would be beautiful. And colleges, basically, the college clubs that deal with this, like even locally, whether it's robotics. Robotics is just gigantic now compared to last year. So there's all this energy technology needs to basically move lower. You need to take advantage of it. Somehow basically get on the nationwide network of education from high schools, colleges, especially even middle school. Same thing, there's great kids out there who just want to do something and tell them they can be successful. They can make money in the future. They can get a job. They can get an internship. Sell that whole concept to them. You guys are missing the boat.
I don't think we're missing the boat. I think actually you're making a great point. And so for the purpose of the camera that's being videotaped, the comment that was made was, if you're not focusing on high school students, if you're not focusing down at that level, you're missing a tremendous source of innovation. And you're absolutely right. For what it's worth, many of the programs that we come in contact with TandemNSI are not designed to try to fix the core curriculum. I mean, good luck on that, but when the government says looking for non-traditional source of innovation, they mean non-traditional source of innovation, which could mean a high school student. We were recently involved with a robotics outreach program where the program manager, looked at some stuff for people that were very young. So it varies by program.
Just curious, what's your background? The guy that asked the last question.
Other than really good at public
Are
speaking.
you in the school system somewhere?
Are you a teenager?
No, I just love technology. Love technology, everything about it. The whole
And-
future's all going there.
And we hate the time that people spend on Minecraft.
And I would say, from just the renewable energy standpoint, I mean, this is something that's starting to filter down, right? When you stop the average American and ask them how much electricity is from solar energy on the grid today, like you get some pretty wildly large numbers, right? And we're just cracking 1%, right? But the conception there is something that's much different. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, our office has tried to design programs where you're kind of distilling the essence of problems in, let's say, the solar industry down to a couple line items. And we're now actually even solving research. It can be business plan related, et cetera. I mean, there's a gentleman here in the front row who created a program simply for this, like trying to leverage people in college who might be in business school by basically taking the problems in the industry, boiling it down to the easiest to understand common denominator, and then putting prizes or incentives behind it, addressing it. And so I think what really needs to do is not necessarily translating down or not, moving it down. It's just the government acting almost as translator a little bit, right? So it's making the connection between how do we make all this work on a grid and making it easy to understand to someone further down. So your point is extremely well taken.
Yes, ma'am, all the way in the back.
So I hear a lot of discussion about engaging small businesses and their innovative potential. I hear a lot of discussion about tapping the metal vendors in industry who make hardware. What about the management consultants who can come help be your intermediaries, can help with your strategy, who can help identify the right talent, who can help create a roadmap, facilitate the dialogue, create the right kind of business plans that show you the ROI. I haven't heard a single discussion about management consultancy in the last 2 hours of dialogue, and I think they're a critical player that isn't being engaged at a level that will really accelerate your results. And I'd like to hear your reaction.
Well, first of all, it's important to put in context that this initiative is designed to get the metal vendor and the entrepreneur direct in contact with program managers. Because that's what our mandate is to do. What you're describing is the industry that built Northern Virginia. I mean, we're all here today because in 1970, IDA and various other organizations, well, that's what we do really well. So don't think for a moment that we're suggesting that there isn't an important need for people to figure out how to bolt things together, or to think for a moment that we don't acknowledge that ultimately many of the things that you all create are going to be in the program of record that's going to be integrated by what you describe as management consultants or technology consultants or integrators. It's implicit and understood. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. You're not lost in the conversation, but in order to get you and the people like you the kind of opportunities that we need in the 21st century, we have to get the garage inventors, the people that are currently off the grid, creating neat stuff that you all can bolt in. That's how we see it all.
Are there programs for the small businesses in the region to connect with an Accenture, a Booz Allen, or somebody like that? Do you have a formal intake process for these small companies to engage and take advantage of some of these services?
Are you with one of the Belly Bandits?
No. So I'm with Accenture, but
yeah, sure.
I'm technology, Accenture agnostic. It's all.
Yeah, but you guys do a lot of outreach and teaming.
We do.
Right.
So what we've seen, particularly in the cleantech space with ERE, there is a preference for small businesses to deliver the most innovative technologies who cannot scale,
Right.
who lack the depth. And so I appreciate the focus on small businesses, and I also think that there's something missing in the equation to help them scale, to help them collaborate, combine their superpowers to actually deliver what you're trying to achieve.
I completely agree.
Just to comment on that point, in things like the consortium, in the OTA world, it is a collaborative process. So again, it's not a situation where the government sends out a bid, everything's sealed, nobody talks to each other. It's collaborative not only between the successful small business in an award or a contract, but it's collaborative among the members as well. So small businesses who are a major part of this consortium